It's all yours.
Welcome to the stream. Today we've got the privilege of speaking with David Clements, an election integrity hero, writer, filmmaker, attorney, advocate, uh, citizen, and believer. Hope I've covered the gamut. Um, we wanted to talk about what just happened in Wisconsin. It's kind of puzzling to people, and I'm just on the surface for the layman who doesn't spend a lot of time analyzing voter integrity issues. A state that Trump carried suddenly has gone very strongly for a radically left-wing Supreme Court justice whom everybody knows will gerrymander the voting districts to take away two House seats, potentially handing control of Congress to the Democrats, starting a new round of pointless impeachments, uh, crippling delays, funding, government shutdowns, legislative blackmail. And yet the same voters voted for what appears to be a strong election integrity provision of demanding voter ID. Uh, Elon Musk put a lot of resources into fighting this,
Mhm.
while George Soros and his allies were pushing it through Act Blue. And how do we explain these election results? What is your theory of what happened, David?
Well, this in some respects is a continuation of our conversation in November, right? Because you and I were both cynical enough to know that Trump has to have something in his back pocket to overcome the infrastructure. And it's clear that he was able to utilize a strategy to get through key swing states while many down ballot races that should have been counted for the R's did not come to fruition. Um,
But wait,
and
but that's because those down ballot races were stolen, right? It's not that we just didn't win them.
yes, and so the thing that where I was left with kind of scratching my head is you had certain grassroots leaders, we'll just put it that way, that were claiming wholesale victory on behalf of Trump in places like Pennsylvania. And I'm talking about, Turning Point and Scott Pressler.
Mhm.
And for about 48 hours, a lot of us are going, well, I don't know what I just saw. And I can't explain to you, is that true? And because some of the arguments that were being presented on behalf of Pressler was that I registered 30,000 people in the state of Pennsylvania. And it was our registration effort that turned into a victory. And a lot of people that I know and trust were saying, that's not in the data. And and so now people have unpacked. There's people like Brian Ferentz, Leah Hoops, many others, Audit the Vote PA, that started sifting through the data to separate fact from fiction. And we're finding out that those claims weren't true. And I maintained with you back in November that I believe that Trump had to overcome two things, and he did. One was we didn't see the materialization of the dreaded F curve digitally on election night reporting, where there was just this injection of votes that came out of nowhere. For whatever reason, in Pennsylvania, Georgia, many other places, that didn't happen.
Now let me remind viewers that is what happened on election night 2020 when they shut down the vote counting. All of a sudden they shut down the vote counting, and then massive numbers of Biden votes materialized in the swing states. And
Yeah.
I believe from your film Let My People Go, you said they had underestimated how many fake votes they would need to create. That's why they had to shut down the counting to fix the machines to generate the right number of fake votes.
Yes, and primarily you see this usually just in the swing states, and the reason why is because the registered vote counts between Republicans and Democrats are they're even. And so it always comes down to like this last day to see if your predictive modeling on how many ballots you've already stuffed in drop boxes during early voting. I mean, you're basically fine-tuning the cheat at this point. And what we found is in many places, Trump was drawing from so many different voter pools that are traditionally off limits to most Republicans. He appeals to the unions. He appeals to working class folks. He appeals to the hip hop generation. I mean,
Yeah.
he truly is an anomaly. And so everyone's like, we got to create the perception in election night reporting through this thing called CITL, which generates data that we see on websites and on TV. So the TV tracker that you see at the bottom.
Yeah.
So we were looking for anomalies. What we didn't see was the digital injection. And even if you had the digital injection, you have to have a second thing happen, which was the delivery of tens of thousands of fake ballots that just materialize in vans in the dark of night and the days following. And there were reports that surfaced in Pennsylvania in particular where white vans showed up with ballots and they were turned away. And so I don't see what the Turning Point folks see. I don't see what Pressler sees, that early voting and mastering this ballot chasing phenomena is what led to Trump's victories. I think it was actually interventions in the digital space to stop that F curve from materializing. And from
Emerald Robinson has this 127 post X thread where she's talking about the White Hat hackers, and then the election volunteers and the people she thinks at the last minute step forward and stop the theft of the presidential race, but weren't able to stop some of the down ballots.
and I would agree with that. And so at least in places like Pennsylvania, Georgia, so I think Emerald has been vindicated by one, let's press pause, look at the data, and start looking at the claims that were made where single persons were saying, Mr. President, I'm so pleased to report to you that I have delivered the state of Pennsylvania. I mean, the hubris
Right.
behind those statements drive me crazy, but they actually drive most of the grassroots in those states crazy because we know what we're talking about, John. So fast forward, you had a recent election in Pennsylvania, and it didn't materialize. The
Well,
infrastructure that we've talked about
that was
led.
where a red county that went hit by huge margins for Trump suddenly elected a left-wing Democrat to the Pennsylvania State Senate, right?
That's correct. In fact, a Republican had carried that area since 1979, and it was a plus 16 R location. So, meaning there's no reason on God's green earth why a liberal Democrat would have won in this specific location. Yet, um, so instead of Pressler and company acknowledging the truth, what did they do? They berated the voters for saying you didn't get out and vote hard enough. And so this is the first time where I feel like because Trump's not part of the equation, because Trump
Right.
really truly is this anomaly that I think people try to capitalize on and attribute to themselves and their efforts some level of genius. And I don't think that's right either. And so, okay, that was Pennsylvania. So fast forward to Wisconsin with the I think it's Brad Schimel Supreme Court justice race in Wisconsin. Many of us were saying, look, to the degree that Schimel comes out ahead, it will be because of similar intervention efforts that we saw in November 2020, but they didn't materialize here.
In fact, what we saw was in a special election, which is when the most motivated voters show up, Republicans showed up, voted for voter ID, and voted for a left-wing Democrat who said she would abolish voter ID. The same voters, not low intensity, low involvement, but high involvement voters, the kind of people who show up for special elections. I mean, election nerds showed up and voted for voter ID and for a justice who promised to abolish voter ID. And this happened with thousands and thousands of people inexplicably split their ticket. That's what we're supposed to believe.
Yeah, and just for context, the Republican turnout for Schimel was the greatest in I think for that type of race in history. Seth Keshel basically acknowledged that the voter turnout was as good as you could have expected, yet he still lost. And there are a lot of people that took the bait on, okay, well, let's not say there's election fraud because as you just mentioned, we got voter ID. Isn't voter ID a great thing that we should all be celebrating? And I think that was a tell by the cheaters is because they want to protect the system. And what I have to tell people is going back 20 years, even your biggest rhino Republicans have been fine with articulating a robust defense of voter ID. Let's make sure we have voter ID. And so I'm sitting there going, why in the world would like Dick Cheney like creatures be, for voter ID? Why would the people like the Paul Ryans of the world, the people that I loathe, universally be in favor of voter ID? I'm saying there's something's wrong because usually
But
I have to.
wait. Let me jump in here because our viewers might not realize rhinos are in on vote fraud and want the corrupt machines, just the way the Democrats do, as you point out in your film, because the rhinos use them to steal primary elections from MAGA candidates, from populists, from conservatives.
Mhm.
That's how they take over local Republican parties, the way they took them over in Texas. We have the
Yes.
most liberal Republicans in the world right here in Texas, and they vote like Democrats. So that's people need to understand. That's why rhinos support voter fraud because they benefit from it. Yet
Well,
here they support voter ID. So why that an apparent anomaly?
yeah, and so we have to reconcile something that truly does favor election integrity. I'm not saying that voter ID is not a good thing. It is a great thing. But why is it that the uniparty on both sides of the aisle for, not maybe not Democrats that are high ranking, but if you talk to Democratic voters and Republican voters, you look at the polls, most people are in favor of voter ID. And Republican leadership typically says voter ID is good. And the answer is this. One, it can distract us to focusing on something that is not the main driver of how you subvert the election. Because if you're using fraudulent mail-in ballots, you don't present voter ID. So as long as they can keep the election system that provides you with the metrics, the running tallies of where you are in relation to another candidate in a particular race, you've got the metrics. Now you've got to generate these ballots out of thin air, which they can do because they've got software that basically tells you what the ballot looks like and what the turnout is. And so voter ID does not address either of those
But
scenarios.
what
So,
names what names do they give for the fake voters? Where do they get the names?
well, they're not fake voters. So this is huge. One of the bombshells that Elon Musk presented on stage in Wisconsin was this huge Social Security number breach where you had an influx of millions upon millions of people being added to Social Security. So those of us in the election world, we know that those same data points are used in voter registration. So when people come in and they're signed a social security number, many of the clerks are instructed, you're not to investigate whether or not this person is a US citizen or a non-US citizen, but that can be used as a catalyst to put them on the voter rolls. So what you're finding is that we're generating a real ballot associated with a real voter ID that belongs to a person.
But he's not a citizen.
Either he's not a citizen or he is a no propensity or so low propensity voter that the idea that they would ever show up and confront someone about their voter history and catch it, that the risk is so low that you will risk using their identity to generate a ballot and then submit them into drop boxes. Does that make sense?
Right. Right. So as you said, it's not that illegal immigrants are showing up and claiming to be citizens and voting. It's that their social security numbers are put into the system so that a ballot can be generated and submitted without them even knowing it for the Democrats or the right.
In a manner of speaking, because you have to keep in mind, it's not impossible for people that are non-US citizens to get a driver's license, right?
Right.
And when they show up to the DMV, one of the requirements under law, under the motor voter law signed into effect by Bill Clinton, was to automatically place those people onto a voter registration roll, right? So you can have this great bloat of anyone that wants to have the privilege of driving in the United States. You could pretty much take it to the bank that these people are showing up and materializing on your voter rolls. And these NGOs actually have backdoor access to the rolls. We confirmed that in New Mexico, where all of these radical far left groups were registering people in their get out the vote efforts. So they've got running list. And so if you've got the list, you can now generate a number of ballots to people that exist, but they're not voting.
Right.
And so, but their ballot is, that's the salient
Right.
point. Their ballot is being voted by being deposited into a drop box, or
So
in places like my state where you don't have voter ID, you can go around a district. And if they don't ask for it, you have their name, you check in as someone, you retrieve a ballot in person and you vote it there.
Maybe we can get Scott Pressler to start doing that for Republicans. I'm kidding.
Well, that was kind of the argument, though. So this is what I want to make sure that we're clear on, John, is that there are places to legally chase and harvest ballots, and that's what Pressler tells people, like to the degree it's permissible, but it creates this fiction that somehow we have to go collect spare ballots that might materialize like in a nursing home wastebasket or at a college dorm room. And so there's still a belief in the system that it's operating without a degree of subversion. And what I'm saying is that the Democrats, the NGOs, and the Uniparty are using this as an industrial level way of cheating by printing tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of ballots directly to places like Runback. Runback was a facility in Arizona that services all kinds of states on the creation of ballots. And I spoke with a high-ranking official in Congress after November, and I was privy to watching video and pictures of a congressional delegation showing up to Runback the day after Election Day. And what they found was shocking, John. They found that the ballot printing machines were still on. They were still printing ballots after Election Day.
Wow.
They had video of pallets loaded with tens of thousands of ballots that were being loaded onto Penske trucks headed for California, Nevada, Utah, Colorado, and throughout Arizona. The people that were loading it were non-English speakers. So you basically had this huge facility with 4 or 5 people that couldn't speak English. The CEO of Runback was not expecting this delegation to show up. And I can't, I'm not able to produce the video and stuff. I was sworn to secrecy with the promise that they were investigating this, but this was back when Matt Gaetz was supposed to be the AG. A lot has changed since then. So I'm kind of frustrated that I got to see the video. I got to see the pictures. But the significance of this is that there's no get out effort that
Okay.
Republicans can launch that can match what they saw, which was
Basically, we're a boxer training to fight a robot. And if we just train a little harder, we can beat the robot. No, you can't beat the robot. It's a machine. Do you think much stricter requirements for mail-in ballots for real absentee with excuse, like you need to produce a real valid excuse why you can't vote in person, like they proposed in Texas? Would that be the stake in the heart of the machines, or do they have other means of stealing the election, even if you have voter ID, in-person voting, very limited mail-in balloting? Is there another loophole they can use?
well, the time, the extent that you have, you basically have 3 weeks leading up to election day.
For the early
That,
voting,
yeah,
the early.
early voting certainly hurts. And then they've on the back end created a larger amount of time in many states to count votes, which allows them to just receive things. Oh, we happen to find this. Oh, I didn't look under the doormat. There's more
Yeah.
ballots here. So all of it seems to have to work in tandem, and Trump really gets that. That's why he keeps saying that this needs to be 1 day voting, mail-in ballot. Let's restart the voter rolls. Let's make sure that everyone is a U.S. citizen. And he put out an executive order, which is actually quite astonishing if he has the cojones to enforce the black letter law that's there. So what he did is he worked with an existing framework under the black letter law as it exists with HAVA, that's the Help America Vote Act, and NIVRA, that's the National Voter Registration Act. And to the degree that he's serious about investigating and cutting funding to the states that don't come up to speed with the legal requirements, you're not going to use a machine. I'll give you an example. It requires that the voting system guidelines, they're known as the VVSGs, have to be up to date, which is 2.0. Based on our audits and our analysis across the country, there's not a single state that is currently up to standard to the 2.0 version. So if Trump's telling the truth, the EAC has to decertify and decommission those election machine products going forward. And I think they've got till September to come into compliance. So like again, like no one's following the law. That's the thing that's frustrating. And there hasn't been requisite consequences. But if Trump is tying funding that states would normally receive from the Help America Vote Act and say, look, we've done an inventory. We've asked for you guys to prove to us that you've gotten certification from an accredited lab and you haven't done it. Sorry, you're not going to be able to use these machines. The impact of that is huge, and it's flushed out some of the villain scum already. Adrian Fontes, who's the corrupt Secretary of State in Arizona, has already published to the world that he's going to defy the executive order. So there's a showdown. There's a high noon showdown where we're going to have to see if Pam Bondi finally pulls the trigger and starts arresting people for this defiance. Because at some point, um, even though HAVA doesn't lend itself for like criminal prosecution, Trump has to pursue this from a national security standpoint. He has to pursue this from the mantle of someone that says out loud that, look, if our elections are critical infrastructure, we need to treat them with the same level of scrutiny as we do with like our nuclear silos. And that just hasn't happened yet.
Right. So if foreign governments could conceivably hack our election, that right there is a national security threat. I think Trump was they tried to present Trump during the battle after the 2020 election. They tried to present him with a plan for invoking his constitutional powers on this, and actually his staffers prevented him from being given the plan. I think Mike Lindell was turned away from the White House with the plan in his hand or something. It
Yeah.
was really tragic.
It's tragic, but I have a sense that Trump is just far smarter than many of us give him credit for. He has been very explicit about saying out loud that our biggest enemy was the fake news. And so while everyone was telling him, look, you've got an executive order that prohibits foreign interference, and we've confirmed that there's foreign interference in the election through emails that were leaked by Sheriff Darleaf. He was part of an investigation in Michigan where they found out that they had coders operating out of Serbia, Dominion did, and they were changing things real time during the 2020 election. That is clearly a violation of the executive order. You're not allowed to have foreign coders from Serbia doing
Yeah.
anything with respect to our elections, but it happened. So he had a legal basis for it. But um, I think if he would have used the National Guard and seized the tabulators and done an investigation, um, the narratives that were put forth by the Democrats over a 4-year period that these machines were prone to hacking. You also had the Curling case out of Georgia, where a radical leftist judge said it's not a matter of if Dominion can be exploited, it's just a matter of when. It seemed like they primed the landscape for Trump to be the strong man, to seize things. And when he didn't do that, there was this weird kind of befuddlement, like, wait a minute, we've been preparing for this scenario. There's no way he's going to leave office. And by all intents that we could see, Biden was sworn in, right? And then you saw this 4-year period of reverse brainwashing where confidence in media, confidence in tech, confidence in all of these places was eviscerated. And so now Trump circling back after a 4-year period, we all see much more clearly and we go, wait, he's not the way that the media painted him. And it seems like he's unstoppable now. It seems like the latest thing that's on his plate is the wholesale discussion on tariffs and some of the doom and gloom that's going on there. But I've seen enough of Trump where it seems like he's got a counterpunch waiting every time we think he's
Yeah.
down and out.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, can you point to any tangible evidence that's emerged of fraud in the Wisconsin Supreme Court race?
Tangible in the sense that it's direct. The things that I've seen are there are unnatural patterns in the election night reporting that seems to be reflective of PID control. So I would encourage people, if they're familiar with Draza Smith, to find her on X. She was a former grid cybersecurity expert at Sandia National Labs, and she is looking at the data in places like Maryland, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. And right now, they're saying that these aren't natural patterns, the way that the votes are being materialized. That's kind of above my pay grade, but she is
Okay.
someone that I've worked with very closely and have a very high opinion for. Another person is Peter Bernegger. He
Yes.
is one of the people that has really exposed the donor mule phenomena. He's looked at the data patterns. So right now, what you're seeing are uh, quantitative anomalies that don't make sense from a mathematical standpoint. But the way that you really prove whether or not there was subversion is analysis of this thing called a cast vote record summary. And so to the degree that they believe that they've got a working theory that this doesn't look natural, if they can get a hold of that cast vote record summary, they can put it to the test. And if you're team evil, you're just going to ignore it anyway, because we've analyzed 1,000 cast vote record summaries across the country. And it seems to be the one thing that they won't even engage in an argument because it's such a vital record. So that's what I would encourage people to do if they can, is get the cast vote records.
Is that something Pam Bondi can and should do?
Well, under the law, it's a public record. In fact, NIST put out a directive in 2017 that the intended audience for cast vote records is the public, in addition to your election officials. And so it's not something that we've experienced much success in the court system. So state codes, they're ignoring that HAVA requires an audible trail and that the cast vote record pursuant to federal law is a public record. Um, they're just they're just using standing to stop the American people from getting that record. And
That's right. We just saw a case that dragged on for 7 years in Georgia. And after 7 years, the judge decided, oh, wait, the plaintiffs don't have standing. It's dismissed.
yeah, so what hope and prayer do we have? So to the degree that Pam Bondi has resources that we the people do not have to get those records or demand it through investigation, of course she should be able to. But if you just read the law as it's written, average Joe Blow should be able to get this. It's a JSON text file. It's very small. You can have it emailed. There's no reason why we shouldn't be able to get basically a working index of numbers on how uh, votes were counted in this record.
This seems
And
like a job for Doge, definitely. And Elon Musk was paying attention to this race. Maybe there's some hope he'll take this cause up.
yeah, I would love to see the minds at Doge look at the work that's been done by many of the experts I've worked with, because they've got computing power that's just on a whole nother level.
Um, on another note, we at the Stream did a 4-part series on the lawfare that's been aimed at you for largely, well, for all your work, but it's recently because of your work on behalf of Tina Peters. Can you give us an update on what's happening with you and what's happening with Tina?
Yes, well, we learned today that she's been transported to a Denver prison facility, which is actually a good thing. It's not good that she's still in prison, but people need to understand that prisons are much preferable to jails. Jails are usually places for short-term stays, people that are in and out, and they don't have the level of facilities, commissary, and things that I guess it provides a greater degree of stability than being stuck in a jail. And
Maybe
poor
better
Tina,
medical trick.
better everything. It's not great, but people, not all prison systems are created equal. But my understanding is that the prison facilities are going to be um, far better for Tina than the jail that she's been in since October. So that's good news. As far as the investigations into my license, I'm happy to report here that I got a letter from the disciplinary board recently, and I'm now 6-0. So I've prevailed against the latest complaint. And I think part of it was in relation to the article and just the help of folks at the stream to get my story out, because it really,
Rachel Alexander, who, if you're not following her, you need to be. She's a Stream veteran. She used to work for us. She now works at a paper in Phoenix, and she's done amazing work on lawfare and election fraud.
yeah, she is one of the biggest champions for John Eastman. Covered his bar trial, which is where they wanted to take me. But getting out the truth about people like Trent Toulouse, this was the guy that filed the sixth complaint. And when you start providing the receipts, like this guy is posting things that are sympathetic to pedophilia and lowering the age of consent, as a disciplinary board member, you're kind of stuck with the idea, okay, this is not the case that I want to die on going after Clements. And
Yeah,
so God has given me the great or the good fortune of having complainants that just doing rudimentary research, they are completely unhinged. And that certainly helped me. I don't want people to think that I'm some brilliant person that just was able to get out of this because I'm great at the legal profession. God has helped me with the caliber of villain that has filed complaints against me.
Oh, great. Well, is there anything else you would tell the ordinary citizen and voter they should be doing right now besides praying, to try to help claw back our elections from these machines and the corrupt people who control them?
Yeah, to me, the solution remains the same that we put out in the film, which is um, Trump's doing great work. And I believe in the executive order. I believe in the legislation that's been put out by Colonel Reynolds and many others. I think it was Pete Sessions, the Make Elections Secure Again Act. There's great stuff on the horizon, but the American people have to be willing to take the baton, so to speak, to administer those elections. So, to the degree that um, our wishes come true and they start enforcing and arresting people and sanctioning clerks for violating his executive orders, we have to run and administer the elections, which means it's got to be done by what, the National Guard maybe for one election. That's that's probable. I'm not saying it's possible. It's actually probable the first time. But there needs to be a hand-holding effort for civilians to take the mantle. And the only way that can happen is if we're engaged as poll watchers, poll observers, people that object, show up, use our First Amendment rights to expose corruption. And we've got to continue with this mentality where we meet Trump in the middle. If we're on autopilot and we're just waiting for Trump to save us, that's not good enough. I think he's really counting on the American people to rise to the challenge and take hold of this gift he's given us.
All right, great. Thank you so much, David, for all that you do and for taking time to speak with us. God
Thank you, John.
bless.
Anytime. Okay.